Hello and welcome everyone to this live webinar brought to you by Fiix Software. We're featuring IDC today. IDC is a leading industry analyst who researches, analyzes, and provides advisory services for information technologies. Today, we'll be exploring the topic of digital transformation for operations and maintenance teams. It's a lofty term, so we'll break it down for you. First, by looking at industry trends and business drivers. Next, some customer examples and best practices. And by the end, hopefully, we've broke it down for you and we'll net out with some 4 key game changers and what your journey would look like. So let's get started. Just a quick review of the agenda today. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Greg Derricks from Fiix Software. I'll be your host and moderator. We'll be joined with Kevin Permuter from IDC. He's our feature speaker, and he will be covering the trends, business drivers, and some real-life customer examples for digital transformation and operations and maintenance. Next, we'll have Stuart Ferguson from Fiix. We'll dive into maintenance strategies and the CMMS journey. Lastly, make sure you stay around for the Q&A. So I would like to first formally introduce Kevin. Kevin is a senior marketing manager with IDC's enterprise application team. Part of his portfolio is the ERP systems as well as CMMS systems or solutions. For a lot of you folks, you'll know CMMS, but just to be specific, CMMS focuses on operations and maintenance teams. The acronym stands for Computer Maintenance Management Systems. Before we get started with Kevin, we have a quick poll just to get us started. Since the main topic is around digital transformation initiatives, we'd like to just kind of start out and see where you guys are with your initiatives. So go ahead, there should be a poll that pops up. And so there's kind of 4 quick choices for you today, and you can pick more than one if applicable. But in your organization, have you started some Internet of Things or IoT? Are you working on robotics or advanced automation projects? Are you working on big data or artificial intelligence, AI? Are you looking to deploy more mobile computing and smart devices? Or, you know, perhaps you haven't been doing any of these things and starting to look for when you can dip your toe in. I'll give it another second here. And I'll end the poll right now. So as we look at it right quickly, it looks like mobile computing is the big one here. A bunch of you still are looking to get started, and then we've got a good distribution around the other items. So from here on, I'll turn it over to Kevin and let Kevin get started.
Yeah, thank you, Greg, for the opportunity to talk about this topic. You know, it's a fascinating one, and it's definitely one that that we see here at IDC as being, you know, one of the canaries in the coal mine when it comes to digital transformation. So anyway, to get started, I want to say that, you know, we at IDC, we've been watching this world of EAM and maintenance pretty closely. And we watched as it's grown from being a bit of an afterthought in some places to being a much more central part of the strategy and operational, you know, sort of mindset for many companies. In fact, you know, especially for many smaller manufacturers, being able to understand the maintenance they're understanding that the maintenance is playing an increasingly more critical role when it comes to the overall user experience for the customer, the ultimate customer. But you know, in the end, there are some challenges here. I called out a few specific challenges here, including staffing challenges. Of course, as technologies become a bigger part of the overall workflow, staffing and training will become essential, right? Being able to transition a lot of those hard hats, guys that are used to you know, a more analog world, getting them the maintenance staff, you know, used to a more digital world. That's going to be a challenge. And then, of course, what I wanted to do, though, was call out maybe the biggest challenge that we see here at IDC, and that's the continued reliance on legacy systems to perform asset maintenance and asset management. As you know, when it comes to reliance on, we see everything from green screen, unfortunately, to more likely, you know, these days especially with smaller manufacturers, you're seeing a lot of spreadsheet. And, you know, they're using it all over, repair orders, scheduling, and even some of the, you know, replace repair decisions. I you know, of course, being, you know, an analyst that's covering the digital transformation, I really cringe at that. But it is definitely a part of the current state of things, but it's changing rapidly, and we're going to get into a little bit of that in some of the subsequent slides. So yeah, let's, without further ado, let's get into that a bit. Next slide. So as I mentioned, there are technologies that are being applied here to address the you know, asset management issues, and those technologies are prompting unprecedented amounts of spending from manufacturers. As you can see here at IDC, we've been tracking via our manufacturing insights team, and this bit of data is from them. We've been tracking the smart manufacturing movement in detail. We've developed a full spending guide to detail all of these aspects of smart manufacturing and that smart manufacturing movement. A quick look at the data, and I was surprised to see the sheer volume of spend happening in this area. Not just on sort of generally updating, you know, the plant, you know, with more smart devices, but also directly related to strategic asset management, right? And in fact, I think, you know, looking at this data, I think one of the big takeaways is that, you know, in order to compete, large or small, manufacturers are going to have to invest in these advanced technologies. You know, technologies like analytics, AI, you know, and IoT are going to be important. Next slide. So as you can see here, that when it comes to an advanced technology like IoT, manufacturing is way out in front of the other industries. And in fact, even though some of the other industries that you're looking at here have a lot more of that consumer-facing, customer-facing pressure driving, you know, innovation, and that's usually a very powerful driver. But when it comes to IoT, you know, you still see manufacturing out there in front. And then even if you look at certain industries, like, of course, you see retail that has a lot of, you know, the consumer, you know, drive, consumer pressure pushing innovation. But you see in, you know, industries like transportation, utilities, they also have a lot of those customer, you know, consumer-facing pressures. But still, you know, no one's jumped on IoT like manufacturing. I think it's important to understand that in manufacturing, the digital transformation, as you can see here, you know, judging from this particular, you know, graph, you know, digital transformation is not a it'll happen soon type of thing. I think the chart is telling us pretty explicitly that within manufacturing, the transformation is already happening, and will likely only pick up speed going forward here. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about the technologies, that's one of the drivers. But I wanted to dive a bit deeper into that. We talked a little bit. I call it the vortex of technologies that are driving the investment in asset management in manufacturing. As you can see here, we've gathered some data points that highlight the progress of the digital transformation. I'm not going to dive into all of these because they won't let me talk all day, unfortunately. But what I want to do though is highlight the bullet here around data, right? The massive amount of data that will be generated by technologies like IoT and even machine-to-machine technology. As those things take hold, I think the flood of data that you experience now, and I've run into manufacturers that are saying that in terms of their equipment and what they're using, they're only capturing maybe 10% of the data that's out there, particularly in areas like mining and some of the utility areas, a lot of linear assets. They're only capturing a fraction of the data, but even that, over time, it's going to that's just going to expand. So I think going forward, I think one of the big takeaways from this kind of slide isn't necessarily all of the numbers that are bright and shiny. I think the big takeaway is that the data management issue is only going to get more complicated and more intense going forward. And I think in many ways, I really do believe that the real differentiating factor between manufacturers going forward will be how they can manage, analyze, and act upon the data that they get, the data that they already have, right? So I really do feel that that's gonna separate manufacturers going forward more than some of the other issues. Next slide. And as you can see here, this is a bit of an eye chart. That's one of the things analysts are really good at, putting a lot of data on a chart. So as you dive into this concept a bit of digital transformation in manufacturing, we can look at some of the research that IDC has put out around the process manufacturing area, just as an example. And here you can easily see the importance, as you see the top four there, the importance of data analysis and technology investment is going to play in the manufacturing area going forward. I think, in fact, it's very, it's funny, in a manufacturing survey that this is pulled from, you can see how important, I think, in relation to the first one, which is increase investments in production capacity. I think in order to be really close to make more stuff in a manufacturing survey about what they want to do and what they want to invest in, be able to even get close to the idea of making more stuff is definitely a testament to just how important technology and data analysis and data analytics will be going forward. Next slide. So here, what we tried to do is we have, over the past 18 months at IDC, just to take a half step back here, over the past 18 months at IDC, we've tried to flesh out the concept of digital transformation. What does it mean? What specific use cases, when taken in total, sort of push you toward the digital transformation. And what we've done is we've published information on digital transformation related to vertical markets like manufacturing and government, as well as horizontal markets like facility management and procurement. And in fact, what we've done, we've also been able to tie spending. That's in many cases, it's not a done deal yet, but our next goal is to try to tie spending to each one of these use cases and try to understand the hardware, software, and services spend attached to these use cases. But as what we have here, we have some use cases that are driving manufacturing toward that digital transformation. You can see that, we've categorized them into strategic asset management, resilient and lean manufacturing, and then, of course, quality control. For this talk, we'll be focusing on the strategic asset management column. But as you can see, the concept of DX in manufacturing, especially that sort of movement towards smart manufacturing, it is asset management is a critical aspect of it. And we'll dive into a few examples. Next slide. So what we tried to do here is when we were putting the slide deck together, he said, and Greg, was saying, what would be great is to try to understand from a specific use case example how DX is sort of working its way into the lives of manufacturers, especially as it relates to the maintenance. ThyssenKrupp is an elevator manufacturer. They're more on the larger side, European company, and the issue that they were having is the fact that even though the technology for elevators really hasn't changed over the course of maybe 100, 150 years, it's still a box and a rope, roughly. The technology that they've been using that they've been infusing into these pieces of equipment, the electronics that sophisticated electronics that are embedded in these elevators now require the technicians to carry a lot of data to any sort of maintenance issue, any sort of maintenance call. And when they do their PM, all of a sudden, you've got a technician with a laptop and maybe a few other pieces of equipment, and he's got to balance that out and also keep one hand free to actually make the changes or make the adjustments. It's tough, right? It's a tough thing to do. So what they've been doing is that they've turned to IoT. They've turned to augmented maintenance, and explored some technology that allows them to bring more information to the technician at the point of repair, at the point of maintenance. They've been utilizing the Microsoft HoloLens, which is an AR/VR technology that you wear on your head, and it can superimpose information. So all of a sudden, you walk into the elevator and you can see the last 10 maintenance issues with this particular elevator. You can see any warranty information. You can see information that is being emanated from any IoT sensors that are attached to the elevator, vibration, that sort of thing. And it's really sort of a use case that's interesting as we move forward. The idea of both freeing up the hands of the maintenance worker, but then also giving them more information at the point of maintenance. It's a pretty interesting use case. And here's an example of a very traditional manufacturing segment. Like I mentioned, the technology is centuries old, but definitely, sort of braving the waters of digital transformation. So that's one. Next slide. So this one, Limtronik, they actually make control panels for industrial devices. So, everything from, cranes to, big HVAC systems, and then huge, those big medical devices. And one of the issues that they were running into is that, hey, we were having trouble capturing the machine data, right? So they've got a different issue. All of a sudden, what they've got is a data management issue at the point of maintenance. And what they've been able to do is utilize intelligent algorithms and to not just capture the data, but then also help them find, the reason for failure. One of the things that was interesting about this case study is that what you actually have to do in many cases, because even though they're getting a lot of data, it's hard to determine exactly what went wrong, what piece is failing. So what you end up having to do when you go out to do the maintenance, you end up having to go through a large checklist, and sometimes it's a multi-pronged type checklist. And it's just a huge time sink. And what they're trying to do now is they're turning to another advanced technology. They're turning to AI and machine learning to try to understand, the data, interpret the data, and then find that root cause faster, so that they can get the piece of equipment, oftentimes a vital piece of equipment, back up and running. Next slide. Ulbrich Stainless Steel. They make stainless steel. They make it in bulk, manufacture it in bulk. They also do contract manufacturing, and a lot of their steel ends up in appliances and that sort of thing. What they had, the issue that they were running into, of course, was being able to stay ahead in terms of production. When you're making this steel, you make it in long runs, and any one maintenance issue will stop the run, and then of course, suppliers don't get their production quality, don't get their steel, and then of course bills don't get paid. So it's a big deal. Of course. So what they've been able to do, they've turned to IoT sensors, so that they can monitor the critical pieces of equipment to the run, and being able to capture vibration and other sort of temperature and other sorts of sensor data, being able to interpret that quickly in order to prevent any unscheduled downtime. So here's another example of, and these last two, ThyssenKrupp was large, but these last two, they're mid-sized, but they're turning to DX. They're turning to advanced technology to help them do their job better, to help them maintain their systems, to help them maintain their equipment. So I think it's pretty interesting stuff here. And then we get to my last slide here, and I'll try to wrap it up here. I think we're doing okay on time. One of the things, what we decided to do was talk about the steps toward, your maintenance DX journey, right? How do I get to DX? One, it's not a place, right? It's more of a moving goalpost. It's more of a state of mind. But one of the initial things you can do to sort of kickstart that process of heading toward digital transformation is taking one of the things I wanted to highlight first was the idea that maybe the most important thing is to look internally, right? Look inward. Look at your people. Do I have the right skills? Do I have the right skill set of people? If we're going to be adding more IoT, do I have the people that are comfortable with that? If we're going to be adding more AR and VR, as that's incredible, sort of did. Do I have folks that are comfortable with that kind of technology? Can I train them? What do I need to do to train them? And then, of course, you look at your processes. Sometimes one of the big holdups when it comes to, streamlining operations, especially on the maintenance side, is the fact that the processes aren't up to date as well, and adding more technology to a broken process, still probably won't fix it. The other side of that coin is that when it comes to processes, as you add new technologies in, the processes need to change. Even if they were good before, the addition of some of these new technologies will necessitate a process change. You should have to think through all of this stuff, right? And then finally, on the internal side, hey, what are my goals, right? What am I trying to do? In some of the cases that we highlighted here, there were specific goals, right, that were tied to advanced technologies and introducing them to the maintenance operation. It wasn't a sort of boil the ocean kind of deal. It was saying, hey, can we fix this one part first? And then you tie your goals, and then you tie your goals to that specific aspect of your operation. I think that's important stuff here. Now there'll be a more in-depth analysis of these steps tied, of these steps in the info brief that will be a companion to this webinar. But I want to be sensitive to time, so I think I am done. I want to pass it over to the poll question.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Awesome. I'm really happy you could spend some time with us today, and you'll be sticking around for the Q&A, which is going to come up shortly.
Yep.
But before we jump into that, and to set up Stuart, our next presenter, we wanted to get a little sense or a little feel of where you are with your maintenance journey, especially around what types of strategies are you focused on and are using within these maintenance and operations team. So if we can fire off that poll question, you'll kind of see 4 kind of key areas of maintenance. There's reactive maintenance, there's preventative maintenance, there's condition-based, and there's predictive. So in this poll, like, you can select more than one if you are using more than one, like the focused areas. As a lot of companies, they kind of naturally do reactive because they have that run to fail scenario. Of course, preventative is a great one, and there's different versions of preventative, such as like a time-based version versus what often we'll call like a condition-based version. And then lastly, kind of looking at what Kevin had talked about in some of these more predictive and more advanced ways to analyze or forecast when failure is going to happen. I'll give it another second here, and I'll look like I'll close out the poll and move on to Stuart. So looks like preventative is the big winner here. Not a big surprise, but that is a tested and true area. So we will now kind of turn this over to Stuart and let him jump into his section. Go ahead, Stuart.
Thanks, Greg. So I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Stuart Ferguson. I'm here with Fiix Software as the solutions engineering lead. In my previous roles outside of the CMMS industry, I worked in maintenance and operations with Procter & Gamble through operations management, kind of living that day-to-day operations and maintenance life. So bringing that kind of experience in and talking about, the CMMS journey and maintenance strategy, where we really want to talk is basically what you guys have just shared with us. And it's exactly what we typically see coming out of the space where we play, right? It's that preventative attitude, that time-based, condition-based, where you want to know and replace things before you actually hit that critical failure. But we still live in this world where reactive maintenance is still a reality. So what we do see most is that reactive, time-based maintenance. You're doing your quarterly inspections, your quarterly preventative maintenance, that kind of thing, where you're taking your equipment down on timed intervals, and that is core of almost all maintenance strategies, really, that we see after those kind of become defined within an organization. What we do want to talk today, though, is taking that core, that reactive, getting your preventative, your time-based, and starting to play in condition-based monitoring, and really moving that upstream. So how do we identify what's next, and how do we move there? And one thing I will always say is it always revolves around these strong fundamentals. So your preventative, time-based maintenance, that's not going to go anywhere. And I think we lose sight of that a little bit when we talk about this best in class and really driving after this predictive analytics and AI. That will come into play, but where we're going to use that is your most critical assets, those pieces that can't go down, those really high value assets. What you are going to find is a proper and a really robust maintenance strategy is we're going to revolve around all of these. At some point, we are still going to do reactive maintenance. There's not a lot of applications I've ever run into where you replace a light bulb before it burns out. A good example of where a reactive strategy actually does play best. Coming from this, I really want to point out that what you're looking towards is an actionable endpoint. So when you bring in all this equipment and sensors, devices, when we start talking about time-based and condition-based maintenance, what's your actionable endpoint? What are you using to really drive these results and drive action coming out of this? And that's really where the CMMS journey starts to play. And I only have a couple slides for you, and I think let's take a look at the next one when we talk about the CMMS journey and where we're going. So if you look at this connected platform box here in the middle right, that's really this holy grail of where we're trying to get to in the CMMS industry, where everything's connected, everything's talking. Really what you're looking for there is an open, connected platform, sharing data between multiple systems, multiple devices, right? You don't want a locked-in ecosystem where everything's closed. You want to be able to share that data and move it around. The reality is, this isn't where we are as an industry yet. And we can't get there without those bottom left two items, right? If you can really drive your asset performance and really drive that maintenance efficiency to a point where all of your work is tracked, your asset performance is improving, your maintenance efficiency is improving, you can manage against that. And that's really those core bread and butter buckets of what a CMMS does for you. You can really get your work in there, you get your asset information in there, you start building this data set where you can then move up and to the right, where you get into this reporting and analytics, and that's really making these data-driven decisions. And we do see a lot of this today. The only problem with how we see it today is it's very manual. So you're working off of Excel sheets, you're pulling this data out of legacy systems and trying to crunch it. And you've got some brilliant people spending a lot of their time sorting through and finding data instead of actually actioning that data. And that's really where we get into the reporting and analytics system of a CMMS and what a CMMS feeds. So not only are you going to take information from your CMMS, you're going to take information from maybe your ERP systems, maybe your machine level SCADA systems, and really start driving into those assets and the details and what you're doing on a day-to-day, what you're doing down the road, and making decisions on what's the most important. From there, we move into that connected platform. When you're pulling that information from all these different sources, we can start to automate that process and integrate those processes where your CMMS system could be taking in that vibration analysis and actioning that in a live manner so that your technicians are on the floor, with their mobile device, getting a push notification that tells them a vibration analysis creeping out of spec on a roller conveyor on the other side of the plant, right? And they can inspect that, take a look, plan that maintenance, and really react to that condition on a live and in a live way that really means something, to them and avoids failure. Once we get that connected platform, which is really where we're pushing to, we're going to unlock these new ways to operate where, you know, we're not going down. We're predicting our failures. We're predicting when we need to do our maintenance, how we need to do that maintenance, and at the right frequency and when. And that's really, you know, where we're all kind of looking to right now. So I don't want to talk for too long. I know we want to get to some Q&A. So hopefully we got a little bit in the weeds there with as far as maintenance strategy and CMMS and how that ties into the journey. But more than happy to open the floor at this point to some Q&A. And Greg, if you'd like to kick things off.
Thanks, Stuart. That was awesome. And Kevin, I'm going to welcome you to come back in unmuted. So we'll get to a few quick questions.
Yep.
Right here. So one of my first quick questions right off the bat, and just for you guys to know, we do have a chat panel as part of this webinar. So this is where you are typing in your questions and we'll read them off from there. We've also had a few that were submitted before the event. There was a place in the registration where you could add some. So I'll just pick one randomly out of one of the earlier ones. So the first question, maybe I'll let Kevin start. What is the relative complexity and cost do you feel of adding IoT sensors onto your machines and starting that journey on condition-based maintenance? So why don't you start, Kevin, and then I'll have Stuart follow up from there.
Yeah, the complexity. So I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Because, and I like the way you phrased the question, because, you know, I think one of the things that we run into a lot when we get called into to help out is the idea that, oh, we just, you know, you just throw some sensors on and, you know, and then we're done. You know, and then all of our problems are fixed. But when you add the sensors, when you add that to your workflow, one, there's a data management, you know, consideration that needs to happen, right? So you need to be able to capture that data quickly and easily. So there may need to be investments around you know, data capture systems or data capture, you know, sort of pieces of equipment to capture that data. There may be, if there's a lot of data, say you're in a large plant, there may need to be an investment in some edge computing to kind of process that data at the edge and then send that to the system in a more curated way. But then also, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, is the idea that, hey, when I add this data to my plant, you know, now all of a sudden, you know, the processes around that data need to change a bit. So you need to think a lot about you know, how the processes can be adjusted. Sometimes you may need to add in a layer between the maintenance folks and the data as someone that is there to help you know, analyze and interpret that data. So there's a lot to think about. That data may now also be part of any sort of approval flows in terms of spare parts or that sort of thing. There's a tremendous amount to think about. So when you go into the world of IoT, you start adding sensors, you know, just sticking a few sensors on some equipment is just the beginning of a larger initiative. And if you think of it as in a more holistic manner, meaning not just the tech, but also the people and the processes, I think you can get a better understanding of the true complexity and true cost.
Thanks, Kevin. That was awesome. Hey, we have quite a few questions coming in, so I'm going to forward this next question over to Stuart. It starts out, hey, I'm just getting started. Do I need a special technical resource to start my CMMS, and there's a kind of a two-part to this question. The second part is then how safe would that data be for that CMMS, especially in a cloud-based system? So Stuart, go ahead.
Excellent, thanks. So as far as special technical resources go, really where the CMMS space is going, and you referenced it in the second part of the question with the cloud, the technical expertise needed to really stand the system up goes down significantly. What we can do is actually, we're at this point where we can enable the maintenance managers in your organization, the technicians themselves, and really have them own all this data and set the system up, monitor it, and work it end to end. You don't need these, a complex, technical person who needs to, set up the database and get all the parts in place. We can do that for you now, and really put the keys in your hands so that you can go and get started in your CMMS journey. And when we talk about the cloud, we get questions about security quite a bit. The reality is, cloud computing is still relatively new to the manufacturing space, but fortunately, it's not relatively new to the, outside and other industries. So we're working off a framework that's been, very well flushed out. When you look at, the width and breadth of cloud computing, we talk about anything from, your social and your accounts, but people don't realize that there's a fair bit of actual very secure data stored through clouds as well. For example, a lot of banking is moving cloud-based, especially, the internet banking and areas like that. As far as security of your information goes, typically, and I strongly advise you to, really put this through the process when you're evaluating a CMMS, but they should be very well protected, redundant, in reputable cloud-based providers. So for example, you start talking about your Amazons and your Microsoft Azures and some of these larger, companies with great infrastructure that you can really leverage these security tools to make your CMMS, rock solid and make sure that your data is always secure and available to you.
And Greg, I wanted to add on to that a bit as well.
Please
Is that
do.
all right?
Please do.
So we hear this a lot, the question of security, and one of the things that Stuart mentioned is that a lot of your banking information is already being routed that way. A lot of ERP information is being routed that way. A lot of financial information is already being routed that way. Some of the fastest growing software providers in the financial space and the fintech space are all cloud. And there are a tremendous number of initiatives that are growing up to even to reinforce the cloud when it comes to their security standards. So I think what you almost have to ask is, hey, is it better to have someone else like Amazon, AWS, handle my security, and they've got tons of resources, or do I want the 4 guys that I hired out of BU to handle the security at my plant, and if it was me, I would take the Amazon security resources, as Stuart mentioned, over the 4 guys that I hired from BU that are eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew in the back, right? So that's I want to be a little glib about it, but it really is a situation of, do I want to do this myself and incur all the expense and still have a hard time staying ahead of all the patches and all of the security issues as they arise, or do I want to outsource that and get back to the business that I do?
Excellent points, Kevin. I'm really glad you shared that with us. That is awesome. Hey, I actually have a question. They sent one to Mr. Moderator, and it's a very logistical question, so I'm glad to answer that. A lot of you guys might be wondering or asking, do I get a copy of this recorded webinar? Yes, you will. So we're going to package together in this little goodie bag here on the right-hand side the recorded webinar. Plus, Kevin referenced already, there's a special IDC info brief that's been written with a lot more details around this digital transformation and some of those examples that Kevin had suggested or cited. And then we have a few other things that we're all going to package together as a link. It will go out to the email that you use to register. So you'll be able to click in there and pick and choose what you're looking for, to maybe share that recorded webinar with some colleagues, watch it again because you maybe missed a note here or there, or dive into an IDC info brief. My last thing I did want to highlight, since I'm kind of talking about how to get more information, if you didn't get your questions asked today, or you just thought of some after the call, make sure you reach out to sales@fiixsoftware.com, and we'd be very, very happy to spend some time with you on the phone and talk more about this topic or other topics. So we'll just continue with Q&A here if people would like. We'll hang out here till about 2 o'clock, but Eastern time, so at the top of the hour. So I'll go down back into the questions. And this one, it's again kind of that same type of question, Kevin, but just from a different lens. I'll start with you and then let Stuart chime in. It's they would like to get started more with this kind of complex condition-based predictive maintenance, and they still are struggling with what's their first step to take. And so, I think it's that whole maybe the scary, don't know what's behind that technology. Maybe you can give some practical advice of a first step. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think what when we hear this kind of question, the question underneath it is kind of what you were talking about, right? Like, hey, I'm a little reticent about stepping into the digital world, right? In some ways. I think one of the things that you have to do, and I mentioned it, of course, I went into detail about sort of taking a look internally, but the next rung on that ladder was, taking a look at the right software provider, right? I think the best software providers out there, they're gonna act, of course, as software providers. They're going to be writing cool software, cool CMMS software that helps you, streamline, do that kind of thing. But the best ones out there, they're gonna also have resources to step in as advisors, right? To step in as coaches. So one of the things that you can do is take the bull by the horns and say, okay, if you guys want my business, help me think through this world of IoT. Help me think through this world of machine learning. What are you guys seeing in all of your implementation? So that's also a very underrated resource, is the actual software provider themselves.
Excellent insights there, Kevin. I think, just to add maybe a little bit more to that, is that, I think you nailed it. I think a lot of people, perhaps on this call and just out there in operations and maintenance, haven't bought software before. They bought technology before. A lot of times we call that operational tech or OT. So maybe, they might not realize that sometimes starting out with a software vendor, they will give a lot of kind of consultative or advice-based to get you get your head around what you should be looking at, and then you can kind of take it from there, learn and grow. So I kind of paraphrased you there, Kevin. So I hope that made sense.
Yeah.
I'm gonna did it?
Yes.
Awesome. I'll also turn it over to Stuart to see if he had any other kind of thoughts on if they're getting started on these more complex systems like a condition-based or predictive. What would their first step be outside of using some of the vendors out there? Would there be some other kind of practical recommendation you have on a first step?
I mean, the first step really depends where you're at. I would always suggest, though, taking that step, whatever it is. Typically, we're going to see somebody with, maybe they have a CMMS, maybe they don't. Maybe they have their data, maybe they don't have that data in a system. But the big thing is, no matter where you're at right now, whether it's reactive or preventative, get all of that work order data and all the data of the work that you're doing against the assets into a system where you can pull it out. Because then you can really focus that effort when you start moving towards this predictive model, when we start really taking in condition-based and really driving to this model of knowing what's going to fail before it fails, you want to make sure you're doing that on the right pieces of equipment and the right maintenance types, so that you know how to respond and what to respond to when that does come up. Too often we see people jump, way too far to the right and get really, really granular, and they know it's going to fail, but there's no system to receive that, and there's really no groundwork laid for how they're going to handle, the escalation and how they're going to actually deal with the issue. So I would say, always start somewhere and make sure that you keep that data and really build that data set as you move towards that, predictive model.
Excellent. Thanks, Stuart. So we have a lot of different questions coming in. So I'm trying to read them quickly and sort through ones. How about this one? We'd like to know if the software can accept asset inputs such as an actual machine running time or some sort of device-based input. So maybe I'll start with Stuart this time, and I'll let you wrap up there, Kevin, on your thoughts on getting that device-based inputs. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, short answer, yes. That's really where we're going. When we start talking about this connected platform and really bringing these systems together, it's all about being open and creating this ecosystem where you're sharing data with your CMMS and with your MES, and really bringing in those live triggers. If your asset's telling you what's wrong, there should be no reason that you can't connect that asset or that system that has that data to your CMMS so that you can push that work order directly out to the field immediately as soon as you know that failure is going to occur. We need to make that agile, really get that streamlined, and connectivity with your CMMS is definitely something you should be looking at in the future, and it's something that that I know is definitely available depending on where you're at in that CMMS journey.
Yeah, and this is Kevin. One of the things that you heard Stuart say, and I just want to bring that out, is the idea of openness, right, in the ecosystem. I think if you're out there looking around the ecosystem and how easy you can get data into the CMMS and get data out of the CMMS, right? That's what you're going to be looking for, right? So how does that manifest itself? Advanced APIs, right? And those connective tissue. You're going to be looking for a developer. You're going to be looking for a solid developer site around the technology, and developer tools around the technology, so that you can spin up your own short micro solution around the developer tools around that CMMS very quickly. So in short, you're looking for great APIs. You're looking for an openness. You're looking for low code, no code, kind of help when you're going to be adding something. Those are the things you need to be looking for when you're looking at adding a new CMMS.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The open API set's critical. And something else, you want to look at is making sure that it's going to work with all your pieces of equipment, not just particular ones, right? You don't want to get pigeonholed into a point where, you have to buy, all one sensor set. You want to make sure you're keeping that open and leaving yourself available to, maybe that next new thing in equipment that you want to purchase. You don't want to lock yourself in. So make sure, we're playing friendly.
Hey, excellent, guys. That was good detail. I think we'll take one more question, and we'll go to Kevin first, and then back to Stuart, and then we'll wrap things up. And this is very kind of specific, so maybe it's going to stretch your thinking and creativity a little bit. But they are asking specifically around a baggage handling system on capturing data from assets that tend to having a repeating problem. So they ask here, how would you see these tools working in that baggage handling system? It sounds like maybe it could be an airport type customer out there, or maybe some sort of other customer like that. So Kevin, you want to take a crack at that?
Yes, I'll take a crack at the one of the spirit of the question, as I don't necessarily have any details around baggage handling specifically, but going back to what we were talking about, data moving from one system to the next, that's incredibly important. And in order to do that properly, first you need to as Stuart mentioned, you need to be able to make sure that the data is clean and being collected in a proper fashion. So I would imagine that for this baggage handling solution, one of the main things is being able to curate and sort of cleanse that data so that it can be ingested quickly, and then it can be acted upon.
Awesome. That's good suggestion there. Kevin, I'm having fun with you on that one too, because I know you travel quite a bit. So
Yeah.
Who knows? You might have went and looked behind the baggage area too. Stuart, why don't you also give it a crack? I know you travel quite a bit too.
Yeah. I would also say, baggage handling is something we've actually seen quite a bit of. But when we talk about baggage handling and really that asset data, when we talk, the real thing that I wanted to double click on was the repeating problem. So it's a repeating problem. Do you have the data that tells you it's a repeating problem? So when you're capturing this data, what you want to be doing, right, is capturing it, noticing you have a problem, recording that, record all the details of what you found, how you planned it, how you executed the work, and really what triggered you off to that, so that you can start being able to see that before it actually occurs. That's really how you're going to get that predictive bit. So, talking about, baggage handling, if you have a conveyor and you have sensors on a motor that's starting to, bring up your amperage, and you're starting to see that coming, and from previous work order history that typically, we had to replace a burnt out motor, and we actually had to take out a bunch of, loose articles from underneath the conveyor. You're actually going to start to be able to plan that, oh, you know what, my motor's probably okay. I'm catching this spike early. We need to go and do an inspection and clear out everything under the conveyor that's causing this motor to open. So it's really what happened previously. And it's not just, the motor's jacking up, so let's replace it before it fails. It's what's causing the motor to fail and really driving to that root cause. Hopefully that kind of answers that repeating problem, right? We drive to that root cause, use your previous data, dig into previous work orders and how you fixed it in the past.
Awesome. That's a lot of good details. At this point, I'd like to, again, really thank Kevin. Kevin, thank you. Stuart, thank you. Last note again, on this slide, you can contact it at sales@fiixsoftware.com. Look for your email and you'll be able to get the future assets. Hope everybody has a terrific day.